Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we're looking at a very interesting little carbine here, a pistol actually, manufactured by Palmetto State Armory, the PSA AKV. Basically what we have here is a 9mm AK. I apologize for any back. Now this pistol here, when it first came out, had some big issues. A Military Arms channel, Tim put out a video on the first generation of these that came out, and it sort of was a disaster. This pistol, or the PSA AKV, was based on the Russian Vityaz submachine gun, which is a very neat little gun. And what we have here is sort of a Americanized version of that. Now, Mac saw major problems. These would include, there was the safety lever here would come all the way up. There was no stop for it. Failures to eject. The cartridge case would get stuck in the fire control group because it would come back because the bolt moved back too far, which we're going to be talking about very in detail. The receiver cover was loose. The rubber recoil pad, Mac wasn't too crazy about due to the fact that it was necessary on this gun, which we're also going to show you when we take this thing apart. The rubber pad, they do disintegrate. Mac wasn't too fond of that. And there was a lot of failures to eject. So Mac went back to PSA, and PSA, they stopped manufacturing, and they went to work on the fixes for it. So they had what they refer to as a relaunch. Now, the relaunch put out one hell of a gun, I do have to say. They corrected a lot of these issues. Once we get this thing apart, we'll show you what some of these issues were. And oddly enough, some of the issues that they had with this rifle were the same ones we had at Colt with our 9mm SMG and 9mm carbine, which we're also going to go into it. But I want to go over the pistol first and show you what parts we have. Looking on the back, we have an SBA3 stock. This is a telescopic pistol brace. I'm quite fond of these. I got an A4 on my Bren 2 that I'm testing right now. They're very, very, very well made. As you can see, we have a receptacle on the back of the receiver here that will take a receiver extension for an M16 or an M4 type rifle. We have the standard stamped lower receiver with a polymer magazine well. This magazine takes the CZ magazines. It's the CZ Scorpion magazines. Now, this particular magazine is a 35-round magazine that is manufactured by Palmetto State Armory. It will take the Manticore magazines, the CZ magazines. I only had the PSA magazines for testing here. I had like 3 or 4 of them. And I do want to make a little call out here to thank Brandon from the gun room for loaning this to me for us to be able to do a review on. I tried getting one from Palmetto State, but these are very, very rare to come by right now. And they didn't know when they were going to be able to get me one. So fortunately, Brandon was able to have one. These magazines, I have to say, work very, very, very well. You have extra 5 rounds compared to everybody else. They're sturdy. They're durable. We had no problems with it whatsoever. Now, the nice thing about this versus a standard AK is you have a lock open on the last shot. So you don't have to, dry fire this rifle or pistol at all. So that's certainly a nice benefit. On the left side, we have the bolt catch. The magazine release is a standard AK type in the rear, which as you will consider that ambidextrous. You have a standard AK type safety. This is more like the Krebs where you have the little tang on here, which makes it much easier to manipulate. Now, when you look close, you'll see we have 3 positions. We have safe, an auto notch, and a semi-notch. Well, there's no auto on here, but you still have the 3 engagements, so it's pretty neat being able to have the safe, auto, and fire modes on there. We have a top hinge that when we take it apart, we'll show you it's very much like an AK-74 SU that hinges up. This optic that we have on here, this is actually the optic that Brandon chose, a SIG Romeo 5, which is perfectly acceptable for a little 9mm like this. You have your standard notch sights of that of an AK. We have Magpul MOE pistol grip, which is far better than the standard AK grip for as far as I'm concerned. And we have the AK handguards on here as well that are M-lock. It's very well made. We have a muzzle brake on here, 1/2 by 28 threads, so you can put any suppressor you would like on here. We had this out to a range the first time with Brandon, and he had some issues with it. He suppressed it. He had a bullet come apart in the suppressor. There's also the way this is on here, you have extra long threads on here too, so with a lot of suppressors you may have to have a spacer in there. But this is the muzzle brake that it comes with, and the muzzle brake does a very, very good job. Now this is blowback operated. When we take it apart we'll go into that a little bit more. To the untrained eye it may look like it's piston operated, but it is not. It is blowback operated. So on the relaunch, okay, we're going to take this thing apart and we're going to go over these individual parts so you're able to see what kind of parts were changed. The first part I want to talk about being changed was the stop notch on the receiver cover. This will stop here, where before you literally could take the safety lever off on the original rifle that PSA put out. Okay, for disassembly, obviously we'll make sure it's clear. We're going to push inward on the recoil spring guide. We're going to lift up. Again, it hinges up like the AKSU does. And on the original version, this was very, very loose, which they had fixed. Now we're going to remove the recoil spring, and we're going to see some of the changes in here. Now, when we look at the recoil spring, you'll see we have the recoil spring buffer on the rear, but you'll see this piece here was added. What happened was when the receiver was shrunk down to 9mm, or the bolt carrier group was shrunk down to 9mm, it allowed the bolt to go back very far before it stopped. And when it did, a couple things happened. First, you can see here where you have the operating rod, where that was coming out, and that could cause the weapon to hang up. And also what it would do is when you fired it, it will get caught behind the hammer. Once it's caught behind the hammer, as you can see, it will not move forward. So they had to stop the rearward travel. Now also, because it would go back this far, a cartridge case could, if it missed the ejector, could fall into the trigger group, and it could cause the hammer mechanism to lock up. They did have the buffer on here, which what that would do is it would cause it not to over travel, so the hammer wouldn't catch on it. What happens is when the bolt carrier moves rearward, it has a point of acceleration, first of all to damage the bolt catch, and second of all, that extra space that was left there from there being no bolt sticking out of the carrier, the cartridge case would go back into the fire control group because the compartment is exposed, where you have the fire control group. So in the Colts, you pull the bolt all the way back, you could see that compartment. And unfortunately for me, I had a malfunction with that happen in Jamaica with the Jamaican Defense Force. I had one of those carbines that failed because that happened. And the way that they approached it at PSA is the same way we approached it at Colt. At Colt, what we did, I proposed making a new buffer that gave it an extra ½ inch. So what that did was it stopped that rearward travel. So one, it would have no time to accelerate when it hit the bolt catch, so you wouldn't break the bolt catch. And two, it kept the trigger compartment covered so that would never happen again. Well, that's exactly what they did here. They created a spacer, which you see right here. So by having this spacer engaged, the bolt could only go back to this point, and at that point, the fire cartridge case could not get back into the trigger compartment. And also, the bolt, there was no way that it could catch on the rear of the hammer that would stop it and lock it up. Another way that there was a modification, there was a bracket put in here which prevented the cartridge case from being able to go back in the trigger compartment as well, because it still had to go back far enough to cock the hammer. So a brace was put in here that prevented that issue. So a combination of adding the spacer, adding this bracket, they eliminated totally the ability of the cartridge case to go into the compartment here, as well as they eliminated the possibility of the bolt over traveling back and getting caught in the back of the hammer. So it corrected those issues. And this also gave us a stronger and better ejection pattern. It gave a better reliability right across the board. When we look at the bolt, as you can see, this is a direct blowback. There's no locking mechanism. Now this appears to be a piston, but it is not. This is just merely the guide. That guides the carrier back and forth. So this has nothing to do with the operation. It's all done by the mass of the carrier. Basically, we have here standard gas tube, which all this does is it provides for all this provides for is the alignment of the operating rod. So for reassembly, we drop the bolt carrier back in. We have to be sure we push downward on the hammer so it'll allow it to go all the way through. And we insert the recoil spring And again, Mac brought up a good point about these shock buffers here. They are polymer, like a rubber type material, and they will eventually dry out. So you definitely would have to have a couple of these on hand, I would think, if you were to own this pistol. However, they did make it so if this was missing, it still would function properly, which was very, very important, because the original design, if you did not have this buffer on here, the rifle would not function. The bolt would come back, it would catch on the back of the hammer, and that would be it. You would have to take it apart and put it back together. So this part was absolutely necessary. Now, it needs to be there, yeah, but if it was missing, this will still function now without it. So when you reassemble everything, and make sure everything is aligned properly. And it just closes right on top. Now, due to the fact that this had problems with its first generation, I put a little bit more rounds through it than I normally would. This one has seen over 1,000 rounds, and there was not one hitch through the entire 1,000 rounds. I was very happy to say it worked very, very well, very accurate. Now, the ammunition that we tested was a few. I tested the SIG M17 124 full metal jacket plus P with a velocity of 1,342 foot a second. I did Black Hills ammunition, 115 grain full metal jacket with 1,358 feet per second. Gecko, 115 grain full metal jacket at 1,213 feet per second. And Remington UMC, 115 grain full metal jacket at 1,268 feet per second. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to go to the range and we're going to see how it shoots. As I said, through 1,000 rounds, we did not have a single malfunction with any of the ammunition. Accuracy was superb. As you can see from the target at 25 yards, we had one big cluster. The sight needed to be adjusted a little bit on here. I didn't bother messing with it because this was Brandon's rifle, and I didn't want to mess with his sights. But the group was right where it needed to be. So I definitely would say that they listened to Mac with that first one. They took this off the market, they fixed everything, and then when they re-released it, they released a excellent functional carbine pistol, whatever you want to call it. They do offer this in an SBR configuration. Again, this is the pistol configuration. You can also get this in wood if you want the wood furniture as well. I tend to like the plastic on this one a little bit better. The way the MOE furniture is on here, or the Zukov furniture from Magpul on here, your hand will never get burned by this thing. It doesn't get hot enough with these handguards where it ever would bother you. Now, the ammunition was a combination of all the ones that we discussed, and I did put some hollow points through here as well, just to mess around, and I had no issues with the hollow points whatsoever. So it was interesting to see, though, the problems that they had with this versus the problems that we had with the 9mm submachine gun and Colt, just due to the fact that it was the same thing. This one here, the way the rear of it was, they shortened up it from the front, but not from the rear. The rear of it was still set up for basically 7.62 by 39. So when the bolt would come back, you had the proper amount of space in there for 7.62 by 39. But when you shorten this down to a 9mm, when you don't have that, that long cartridge case to eject before it could get into the back of here. You're using something short now, you're liable to have a lot of problems, and they did. And it was the same with the AK as it was for the AR-15. Having a spacer in Colt, what they ended up doing was putting a spacer that's about a ½ inch that would make up for the missing distance of the bolt sticking out of the carrier. They put it in the back, so it restricted the rearward movement. And that with the Colt design, it took care of the bolt, so it didn't have any time to accelerate when it hit the bolt catch, so you wouldn't be breaking bolt catches. And again, by its rearward travel being limited, it never overreached the trigger compartment, so we never had that issue again with the cartridge case falling back into the trigger mechanism and locking it up. The same thing happened with this, the same thing that was necessary. You had to have that spacer. That spacer solved a lot of problems. It's very nice having the fact this thing locks back on the last shot. And did consistently with everything that we put through it. And I think this is one hell of a setup here. Talking to Josiah over at Palmetto State Armory, they can't keep these in stock. The magazines are also very hard to get. They're as fast as Palmetto State Armory can make them, the faster they go out the door. With MSRP of this for $799, which you can certainly get cheaper. It's a one hell of a gun for $799. The magazines, these are only $15, and you're getting extra 5 rounds compared to the Manticore or the CZ magazines, and they work just as well. I've used CZ magazines in the past. I don't own a CZ Scorpion, but we've used them in the past, and I know several of the other content creators have tested several different magazines as well, and it was fine with everything. So it's not a choosy pistol by no means, or carbine by no means. It takes everything that you can put in it. But Palmetto State Armory has definitely shown they listen to the customers, and they will stop production to get it right. That was certainly a credit to them in the way they handled this whole process. We certainly can thank Tim over at Military Arms Channel for getting them that information quickly, so not too many of these guns were made with those existing problems. If you do have one of these that has these existing problems, get them back to Palmetto State Armory, and they will correct it. Good due to the fact that it caused a lot of major problems. But they stopped it, they fixed it, and they reintroduced it, and it was certainly a winner. So I do hope you all enjoyed this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share. Thank you.